And we're back again.
Hi.
Who do we have here today?
This is Ethan Minsker.
Ethan Minsker.
I've known Ethan for over 15 years.
That's right.
Yeah, from being in East Village. Yeah.
Wow. And so what is he doing on the show today?
So Ethan Minsker is accomplished artist, filmmaker, and writer. And he led the artist collective Antagonist movement. And currently you lead Citizens for the Art, the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And his latest film, Man in CAMO, can be watched on Amazon. And you wrote 2 books.
I wrote 3 books, but I have 2 that are out and available on Amazon, yeah.
Okay. It's called Rich Boy Cries for Mama and Barstool Prophet, right?
Wow.
Welcome.
Correct.
Wow.
I will say that the Man in Camo is available across pretty much all platforms. iTunes, Apple TV, Vudu, DirecTV, Dish TV, Comcast, so wherever you watch movies, not Spectrum, but pretty much everywhere else, wherever you watch and rent movies.
Great. So tell us about the movie. We both Greg and I watched it recently. We loved it.
I was just fucking impressed, okay? I mean, I'm, as an artist myself, and for someone to take that much initiative from, what would you say, from 12, 13, when you started with your first Betamax?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this, when I was a kid, I had, like the Betamax, and I would make these epic films on Beta where I would take 3 hours of skits and put them together. And even in that time, I was imagining that like all these projects that I'm doing, I'll archive and I'll save for something in the future. I didn't know what it was going to be. So even the little fanzines I made when I was like 8 years old, or the first Super 8 films I made when I was 6 or 7, everything I just kept and archived in pristine condition, which when I sent the beta files to the Midwest to get the, transcoded into video files so I could edit, they were all like, this is amazing condition. And I was like, yeah, because I never showed it to anybody. So it's kind of like this secret world of mine that's being thrown out into the world.
So it was like film that you just kept for like 20 years or whatever. You never even processed it. And then.
Yeah, I mean, I never played it back. Like
Right.
I knew then that even when you played VHS or beta, if you play it over and over again, the heads degrade the tape. Right. So I would only show it to the people who worked on it maybe once. And also I would never want to watch it again either anyway. So I'd put it away and it just kept it in pretty pristine condition.
Wow. Do you want to talk about your influences? And
well, let me say something else first. So let me explain it. So like for the viewers out there, Man in Camo is a movie where it's like, it's a self-portrait. It's a artist statement. It's a very meta film, meaning that it's a documentary by me, about me, right? And I think there's a lot of like conflict in that. So when people like hear that, they're like, what, are you a total egomaniac? Like, why would you make a film about yourself? But there's this thing in New York City, when you're doing something creative, you learn really quickly in New York that if you're not the one advocating for your own work,
right, then nobody else is going to advocate for you.
An F. Exactly. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on the show.
No, we're cursing.
Then no one's going to give a damn about your damn project unless you're the person screaming to the high heavens about it, whether you're in a band or whatever. So that said, at the same time, if I was going to have someone else make that documentary about me, I would never give that much personal stuff about me to the filmmaker. You know what I mean? So it's kind of this thing, like if you're going to make a film about yourself, you have to be willing to give much more of yourself out there. Otherwise, why should somebody watch that? Now, in that thing, I had, there's a thing when you watch art documentaries, there's a few people that you see over and over again. Jerry Saltz, like whatever, these big art critics, right? So I knew this guy, I'm not going to say his name, but very famous downtown art critic who discovered a lot of very famous people a long time ago.
Village Voice.
Something like that. And I approached him, I said, well, like, hey, do you think you could be in my film? I sent him a link. And then he was dodging me in the art shows. And I was like, what the hell is this guy's problem? Like, so I confronted him like, hey, can you just tell me, like, do you want to do it or not? And he's like, I don't want to be in your film. And I was like, okay, can you tell me why? And he goes, it's too masochistic. I appreciate your work. I like your work. I don't think you should put this film out there. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So to me, I walked away going like, he just didn't like the film and didn't like my work. And this is his way of saying that.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like when I did pre-screenings of the film as a link to other filmmakers I trust, they always advocated that you have to be willing to bash yourself a little more if you want people to be engaged in the film. So I did try to do some of that, like talk about violence and dyslexia and like,
Correct.
The struggle of trying to maintain mental stability while you're doing something creative. So this film ultimately becomes kind of like this, my life flashing before the viewer's eyes. But the use for viewers to watch it is, it's like, how many ways can you rebuild yourself creatively and try to find inspiration in the few things that you have access to? So it's like, whatever you do, you got to just keep making art. It sounds like a Nike commercial, but it really is like, you have to really just
You
keep
have to
pushing.
constantly be doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know myself when I was a young photographer, if you weren't shooting, you had to be shooting. You're always shooting something. I worked for this really great photographer, and he said, Greg, make a picture a day. And it's the truth.
See, I also do that. That's kind of like, I feel like that's art. Your art practice is almost like exercise. So I feel like every day you should be doing something creative. And so I try to block it out, like at least an hour or two a day, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I'm going to work on something creative. And over a long period of time, that builds to a mass. So it's like, then I have like 3 novels. I have scripts that I've written. I have 10 feature films that I've done. I have nonprofits. I have all these groups, and people will say to me, and they watch the film, they go like, you've done so much.
Like such an what's the word I want to use? Like an analogous, like tremendous amount of work.
But like athletes train every day.
But I say it's like
the
right.
same
It's
thing.
it's like
the
the
same
creative
thing.
exercise. So it's like you have to exercise creatively every day. And so even before I came here, I was preparing for stuff I'm going to shoot tomorrow for 2 other documentaries. I was editing one of those documentaries. So yeah, every day it's doing something that will build up in the long time over to be something huge. So the Man in Camo thing isn't like a film I did. I mean, technically, yeah, it's like 52 years of work, my entire life. There's something in there, but hardcore working on that film is about 5 years of hardcore work on that film to get it done. And that's how every one of my films are. It's usually 3 to 5 years for every film, for every book, between 7 to 12 years. So it's like, do a little bit on something that you're interested in that day. That's the other part. Have a lot of things you're working on, but only don't work on the things you're not interested in that day, because then you'll be damaging it as opposed to accelerating the better parts of it.
I mean, I also found that if you're just working on something and it's just hours and you're not just getting to that point, just put it to the side, take a breath, go for a walk, and then you could always come back to it.
I do that too.
Yeah, I think most successful artists I know.
With this
do that.
pandemic, I've been going to the
look-
park jumping rope for 30 minutes. So that's like a good, and also I find like if you do like something physical exercise, I've been having these revelations where it's like, oh, that would be a good thing to do to add to the project. So jump rope, stay away from people, jump rope.
So one of the main themes of the movie was you being dyslexic, and that kind of triggered your creativity in a way.
Yes, I'll explain for anyone who doesn't, like when people hear dyslexia, it's usually in the form of a joke. And so I think they don't really get kind of a grasp, but dyslexia is a learning disability that manifests itself in a very large group of different ways for different people. For me personally, my dyslexia is with codes and symbols and the relationship between the two. So my issues usually are related to comprehension or like reading and writing, and those are my weakest. So like I can understand complex theories, but dates and names and things like that elude me. And also reading has always been a difficult thing. My history with dyslexia is that it's usually some sort of, and dyslexia is usually a thing where your brain is chemically different than what would be a so-called normal brain. So the theories are that either when I was in the womb, that the umbilical cord choked oxygen off and that I had a lack of oxygen to my brain, or that because I grew up in DC, there was a lot of lead pipes. So I may have been contaminated with lead when I was a kid. So one of those two things.
Or you were probably just eating a lot of like lead chips off the ground when you were a kid also.
Yeah, it's in there.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember
all
that.
the pipes were lead in the city. So
Right.
like only recently, only like 10 years ago, did they start digging up old pipes in the city and being like, oh, wow, these are lead pipes throughout the entire city, which is like kind of unheard of. So they have to go through and they've been taking them out. But yeah.
You know, when we were kids and you know, there were some kids in our class and they were dyslexic, you know, I mean, I always thought it was that, oh, they're reading backwards or they're seeing like, you know, E's look kind of like the EU symbol or something like that. Like everything was like kind of reversed. But you're saying there's many different forms of dyslexia, right?
There's many different forms, but also like that sort of manifestation.
Manifestation?
Manifestation, yes. That one is more in recall. So like your eye is built the same way. There's nothing different between the way my eye structure is or anyone else's. So it's when you read something and you recall it in your memory that sometimes things get flipped. So I don't really have an issue with things getting flipped. But some people do. But I always get this thing like, oh, do you see things different? I'm like, no, I see it the exact same way you do. I just would recall it different if I had that same thing. But I would say is that to the point of this show and this podcast is that when someone has dyslexia, their brain, again, is chemically different. It's on a structural level different. So when one side of your brain has a deficit, the other side excels. And with a lot of people with learning disabilities, you find that they understand and relate to the world in a visual sense. So you have more artists, musicians, whatever.
Actors,
it's like they relate in a creative sense.
Mm-hmm.
So being dyslexic and, you know, understand that they discovered I was dyslexic very early on when I was in elementary school, that, you know, they were giving us these workbooks and stuff. And I was just like going through it crazy and I would run out to the playground. So for me, it was like, I just have to do the scratch on this thing so I can go out and play. And the teacher was like, hey, there's something wrong here because everything is wrong, A, and B, clearly you're having problems with it. Luckily, she had just read an article on dyslexia and that was just the very beginning of understanding what that was. They took me and had me tested for it specifically. And then they took me out of that school and put me in a school for dyslexic kids. So I basically went through all of high school through schools for dyslexic kids.
Well, you went to boarding school, right? I mean, you did.
There was 1 year I went to boarding school. And again, that was for kids with dyslexia.
Yeah, it's in the movie too. Yeah, you talk about it in the movie. Yeah.
But, you know, the moment it's like with any disability, once you're named as something different, then all of the world will then point to you and, you know, harass you and give you a hard time. So
Were you a creative child or?
Yeah, I was always like making films and doing these large scale art projects. And, you know, I did this animation thing that's in the film. It's called like, this Super 8 film I did as a kid where I built these tanks and stuff like that. And I basically had my entire room with just thousands of these little clay tanks that I made to animate, and then I would destroy them. So yeah, even as a kid, I was doing these larger scale projects and stuff like that, and making zines and stuff like that and giving it to other
So
kids.
your first zine was called East Coast Exchange? Or
East Coast Exchange
How
was
old
a
were you?
punk rock zine.
Yeah.
I was 17 when I started that. So like being dyslexic, you know, you're basically told that you can't do anything, that you're going to be an idiot. Like you're literally told you're a moron by the world. And once I started getting into punk rock in Washington, D.C., there was these fanzines in the record stores that I was going to where I was selling bootleg shirts of the Bad Brains and getting in trouble for it.
Deep, in the film.
Yeah.
But I want to say one thing because my brother came from the hardcore scene, and me, I mean, I was more into the Smiths and the Cure, and not into that. But what I found with the hardcore scene is that kids could go to shows and kids could go to underage shows, and kids were accepted, and I think that's what I kind of got out of your film is that you start going to shows when you're 15, 16. I mean, I know kids that were like 13 and 14 and going to like Fugazi shows and all that. And there was this sense of community and acceptance. Do you want to elaborate a little more on that? Or?
Yeah, I'd say, well, there's two things. It's one, the punk rock scene is theoretically supposed to be accepting of everything. But I mean, I talk about this in The Rich Boy Cries for Mama book.
But it wasn't always that way.
No, the more you get into the scene, the more you realize that everything is kind of unified into one sort of thinking.
I mean, I remember like the straight edgers, and then then kids were like there was like the Krishna hardcore scene, and I mean,
I was parts of all of that. Yeah, I toured with H2O for years, and Shelter and all of that.
Shelter, yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the thing is that there's this one unifying thing of like this kind of heterosexual, violent, thing that by the end of my thing of being in punk rock, I was like, this is too, non-inclusive, and that the springboard from that into the art world is that is something that is more inclusive to a limit. Again, it's like the galleries, no, but the art community as a whole is more inclusive. And so in my other films, you'll see it's like we never cared where you were in your span of an artist, like successful or not. We cared about your creative output, and we didn't care how polished you were. We cared about more of your intent, and that will help you develop getting polished. So this is when we started a group called the Antagonist Art Movement around 2000, and did that for about 17 years. So it was a laboratory where we would help develop artists, mentor artists. We would provide venues around the city that were donated to us, and also do street art and art actions in the streets. So spanning the legal to unlegal, to galleries, to cafes, wherever anyone would let us put on a show. And then we started springboarding from that to doing shows in other countries. So if you see the other films, we did it in Portugal, we did it in Germany.
You're like in Australia, I think, right? In Barcelona?
Sydney, yeah. Well, Sydney, Lisbon, Germany, and then United States, like Rhode Island and a bunch of other cities and stuff like that. Now we're kind of targeting New Zealand at some point.
So Ethan, do you want to talk, so when back in 2003, I think that's when you first started the Antagonist Art Movement, what was the drive? I mean, were you teaching, and were you like, okay, there's got to be a better way of getting art out to people. So what was your drive? What was?
I wish my third book would come out, because it's all about that. But I have it written; it's completely done.
You're going to put it out yourself, like you did the other two, though. No?
I may have to, but yeah, I don't want to spend the funds. I like having things in reserve, so I have that in reserve in case somebody was like, "Hey, Magic, would you like to publish a book?" And I'd be like, "Yes, here's a book to publish. It is done and edited."
Of course.
But yeah, no, we actually technically started in 2000, so it was like a year before September 11th, which was a big marker in our creative thing. It's a collective of everybody moving to New York with this dream of chasing what you do creatively. And you get here, you realize that now you have to pay these high rents to live here, so you become a slave to your job. But what that says is that once you're looking around and notice that everybody else is in the same position, you have strength in numbers. So we would collectively bring together a lot of people from different backgrounds. And then at that point, I had stopped working in film, doing grip and electric for like 10 years, and started working in the bars. And the bars are always looking for events. And I knew a lot of artists from doing the fanzines, so I would say to the bars, like, hey, let us do an event here. You'll make more money. The artists will do well. A lot of people will come. Yeah. And it sort of went crazy from there. So by bringing lots of different people together, it provided opportunities that you wouldn't normally know about, and everybody would collaborate and bigger things would happen.
So you brought some zines with you today.
Right, so I'll explain to the viewers who don't know, a fanzine is an independently published magazine. Usually it's based on some sort of fandom. So like fanzine, like you could have it on baseball, music, whatever. Generally, a lot of fanzines are historically about punk rock. And I started doing fanzines in the late 80s because of my dyslexia. A fanzine really has a lot of freedom to make all the mistakes you want, whether something is spelled wrong or cuts off in the middle of a story, didn't really matter. It was, everything is okay in a fanzine. There is no wrong way to do it. So I really hated reading and writing and all that, but I really loved putting together fanzines in the old school sense of like cutting something out with paper, gluing it onto a page, slapping that onto a copy machine, making multiples and spreading that out. So by doing that fanzine, which was primarily a punk rock fanzine, East Coast Exchange, meaning like I was interviewing and covering shows between New York City and Washington, D.C., that I got to meet a lot of people in the bands, got more embedded into the punk rock thing, and then found artists who wanted to contribute for the fanzine.
I think it's a great name. I love the name.
Yeah, I love the name
It's
as
such a
well.
cool name. Yeah.
I'll let you guys do the, I'll leave all these dice for you.
No, so
But also, and then, so I did East Coast Exchange, and then I started getting out of the punk rock thing and more transitioned into the art world. So the next incarnation was Psychomoto Zine, which means crazy machine. So like we live in this life, especially in New York City, where we're, you know, you work, you sleep, you eat, you work, you sleep, you eat. So Psychomoto means breaking outside of that cycle, breaking outside of that machine and leaping into something creative. And then the last things I've been doing is these things called Minsky zines, which are purely my artwork from my sketchbook.
I love these.
Yeah.
It's so like
These are
it's like fold
direct
out.
into the
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
These are called one sheets. So it's
One
one
sheets.
piece of paper. You make a square donut, you fold it up. And with these, I would just throw them like whenever I go to a gallery, throw it on a desk. And this actually led to me doing an art show with the whole gallery and part of this affordable art fair, because I kept throwing it on their desk. And then they wrote me and said, hey, why don't you come sell some prints at our show? And so, yeah.
I mean, how's the zine scene like right now? I mean, I know what zine is, but I doubt like 22-year-old know what
Well,
zine
you'd be
is.
surprised. A lot of the 22-year-olds are into things like VHS, cassette tapes, and fanzines. It's a very weird thing that the younger culture has like picked up. But, you know, for me, it's like I do a lot of video content that's accessible online. You can watch on Facebook. I have like 10 groups, like, you know, a Filmmaker's Guide to Film Festivals, or the Man in Camo, and the fanzine Psychomoto Zine has a Facebook group thing there. So it's like there's all these places digitally you can find and learn more about these things, whether it's Instagram or whatever. But when inside the physical world, you know, I believe I'm not an analog man. I'm an analog man. I'm not a digital man. So I live in this analog world. And in the real world, I feel like you're always trying to reach a new audience. So your first circle is like the people who know you, and then your friends, right? And then beyond that is like people who know your friends, right? So if you want to reach that fourth ring,
your frenemies, right?
right? If you want to reach that fourth ring, that's like people who have no contact to you, no direct contact whatsoever, are not connected through anything else. So a fanzine is a perfect thing. Like I would just throw that, you know, in a coffee shop, a record store, a gallery, on the back of a train, wherever I would go, I would leave this trail of fanzines, and people would pick it up and then contact me, and then I would build and expand my circle. So I think I'm more known for this fanzine because, you know, I've done hundreds of thousands of copies of this. I burnt out
How many
staplers.
volumes do you have? What's the current
This one is 26, but I'm up to like 40. So I did about 2 a year. Every 6 months I try to do one for, you know, since 1988. So
You're still doing the same format. I believe in the film you said that you would just take one subject, and that subject would be the focus of the zine.
For the
right?
issue.
well, yeah, I'd say
Right.
so. Like in these, it's like what I try to do now is feature one artist and then a variety of like writers. And yes, it's mostly New York City, but then I started branching out because it's, you know, a global community. So like this one is Ecuador, and that's Divine, you know, from John Waters. This woman is living in Brooklyn, Bend, New York. This is the kids' books I do with my daughter, so it's like, it's more than 40 zines, but I did a bunch of kids' books because
So
I was reading the books.
She's a contributing artist now.
She's a contributing
That's
writer.
fantastic.
But this artist, again, is from Ecuador.
Okay.
This is the only zine I ever did a cover for anti-gun violence. She's Brooklyn, Ecuador, Sydney, Australia, Hong Kong, Brooklyn. And that's a double. Ecuador.
But to my knowledge, I mean, I remember Vice Media and Vice Mag being a zine. I remember like Accelerator, which was like a skateboard magazine from California. They were all zines, and
Rolling Stone was a zine.
Yeah.
A lot of those original like R. Crumbs things, like those were all zines. A lot of, a zine is kind of like a testing ground where then you can develop into something larger. Unfortunately, like the printed version of most things are no longer viable economically. So for me, it's like I have no ads. If I have access to a copy machine, I will use the copy machine until I'm told not to. So there's no ads, there's nothing charged. I would just put these out for free. I would send them to other cities. I would mail them out to people.
I don't know about you, but I mean, I remember Kinko's on 13th Street, and I think I was there. It was 24 hours, wasn't it?
Yeah, some of the early
Back in the
zines
day,
I did,
yeah.
I had friends who were.
But free access to the copier is better, right?
Well, I'm saying, like, so before I had access to the copy machines myself, the Kinko's over here in Union Square on 13th Street,
Yeah, that was the spot.
I had connections to.
Oh,
So not only would they print my zines, it was safer for them if they just printed up boxes and had it delivered. So
Oh,
I would
wow.
literally just sit in my
oh
house,
my God.
and Kinko's would send me boxes of zines, and they were stapled and
Oh,
colored
wow.
and like everything, and then I would put them out.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, there was a long time where I was really just using Kinko's, but in the zine, I would print these things like kind of the theory of the antagonist movement in my work and in my films is beg, borrow, cheat, or steal. So if you need to get it done, it's fine to break and skirt the laws to get it done, whatever you got to do to get it done, because getting it done is the most important thing. That's kind of a fundamental part of the antagonist art movement. So yeah, I broke a lot of laws doing that. I try not to do that now. So
Do you want to talk a little more on how the antagonist art movement got momentum and how Arturo Vega got
Yeah.
involved? And
yeah, I would say so. Then like picking up where I left it off before, it's like we started doing art shows overseas and all that. So I worked in a lot of the punk rock bars downtown through my connections in the punk rock scene. I got hired at a bar called Niagara on the very first. I was actually technically working at 2A, and they pulled me aside and they're like, "You're fired from 2A," and I'm like, "What did I do?" And they're like, "It's
You go to
it's fine.
Niagara.
Wait,
You're working at Niagara."
2A was always the
And I'm
cooler.
like,
2A
yeah.
was always the cooler.
I
bar.
didn't want to work
Like,
at that. Like,
Niagara, that stretch is like, everybody's favorite stretch.
Yeah,
yeah.
Two-
Well, so I was happy at 2A.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to leave 2A. And they're like, no, it's better. You're going to be working here.
Yeah.
And so I basically was moved from the door at 2A to be the doorman at Niagara from December 19th, 97. And then a few years later, it's like I was sitting in the bar going like, I talk about this in my books and stuff, but I'm sitting in the bar and it's like, well, look at this. There's a writer, a musician, an actor, a painter, and nobody's doing shit. They're all drinking here and it's like 6 a.m. and I'm sitting here with them and I don't even drink. And I'm like, fuck that. I mean, actually I was drinking then. I was like, that's when I was like, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm going to focus on doing something creative, and the drinking is keeping me up too late and all that. So I basically said to all of those people, like, let's start doing something. One was a painter, Anders Olsen. One was a musician, Sergio Vega from Quicksand. And the three of us said, like, let's come up with a name. Let's come up with a concept. Early on, they were like, let's figure out a way to drive this economically. Let's get large amounts of cocaine and sell it through the bars. And I said, to fund artwork, purely to fund artwork. And I said,
Entrepreneurship.
okay,
Yeah.
but
It's just to keep you working.
because it was a network of bartenders and people working in bars coming together. And I said, because of my background where all of my family are all lawyers except for me, and like, big lawyers who worked for presidents and the head of the ACLU and all of these things, I said, like, well, if we did that as an organized group under a banner and a name, that falls under the RICO Act, which means we would all potentially go to jail for a very long time. So I said pretty quickly on, I was like, no cocaine, no dealing drugs.
So it was seriously discussed.
No, it was a serious thing. We had a person, we knew,
Okay.
like, through all of our downtown thing, it's like, if you want 10 kilos of cocaine, you can get it. If we wanted to be gun dealers, we could get it.
You can sell
Well,
them.
what did you think? Your partners were just like, we're not going to sell art unless we have to move drugs, right? Is that like?
Well, it was like we were
their
trying to make
thinking?
it in the theories of movements that in a radical art movement that you could take radical steps and then do something on a larger scale. If you had large amount of funding, true, we would be able to rent galleries, we'd be able to do big press releases, we'd be able to do larger films. But I said, like, the limitations is part of the game. So instead of worrying about having a lot of money, let's take whatever scraps we can get and build from there. So if I make a film like Man in Camo, it's like there's a lot of animation in there, but there's also me hand scrapped coming up with the way to do that animation for zero money. You can hear the 7 o'clock turnout for the first responders. So when you're listening to this
New York City,
and you hear
yes.
everybody yelling, first responders, yay, 7 o'clock.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, so Arturo Vega.
Yeah, Arturo. Yeah.
Um,
So Arturo Vega is an artist, and he was the art director of the Ramones, the band.
yeah, he also like the Arturo Vega's loft is considered like.
I've been there once for a party. Not that I was invited, but the party I went to was at his house.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he used to do a lot of birthday parties
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Wasn't he like on the Bowery or something? Or like,
right.
Yeah, it was like right around the corner from CBGB.
Yeah.
So Arturo also was not only like the artistic director for the Ramones, he influenced the Ramones in such a way that we called him the mixing spoon. So he would bring different elements and really developed what the Ramones were, not just how they looked and how they presented themselves and the art you see behind it, but all the influences into the music and all that. So where he lived was called the Loft, where he printed all of their shirts, but also where the band rehearsed, where the band lived for a big point at the time. And the Loft was kind of this famous place in the Lower East Side. So like you would go to Arturo's house and see pictures of him like Sid and Nancy, like anyone in the punk rock world, whether it was Blondie or whatever, they were all friends with Arturo. And Arturo Vega, as a person himself, is a Mexican-born artist from Chihuahua, Mexico, who moved to Mexico City, who became part of that radical art movement in the 60s that really influenced punk rock that people really don't talk about. That graphical look, hand-cutting letters and all of that, which some would say is from the radical 60s in Italy, but also a lot from this art revolution in Mexico City where the military cracked down on them and really like just destroyed a lot of these students. And they fled Mexico City, which is why Arturo came to New York City. So I met Arturo like working in the bars once I was fired from 2A, moved to Niagara, Black and White and all of those, Bowery Electric. Once I started working in those, I became friends with Handsome Dick Manitoba, Jack Walls, and all of these people that if you ever read the book, Please Kill Me,
Yes.
you would say like, these are all the people that were hanging out. And Arturo was
I would
one
say
of those guys.
they were the Lower East Side influencers of their day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
especially
these were the
Handsome
guys
Dick
that-
Manitoba.
Royalty.
Royalty,
Royalty.
exactly.
these are the guys that
Mhm.
were the fundamental, thing of punk rock at large. I mean, yes, there's Detroit, MC5 and the Stooges and all that, but out of New York City, it was like these guys were the ones that were all around. So there's a film I did in 2004 called The Soft Hustle, which you'll see Howie Pyro from the Heart Attacks and Degeneration and all that, who was Sid Vicious's best friend, or Paul Bearer from Sheer Terror, or Handsome Dick Manitoba. So in that film, which you can find on Vimeo, there's a whole list of these people that were kind of like the, the godfathers of the punk rock scene that, we knew from the neighborhood. And also Jesse Malin is in that film, and Steve Bonji from the Hells Angels. So yeah, it's like, but Arturo came in, he was brought in by, I think Jesse Malin or one of these, no, Jack Walls, I think. And he was like, oh, Arturo really likes, he loves young skinhead men. And I'm like, well, I'm not a skinhead. I'm a guy who has like, I can't grow hair.
So Ethan, it looks like you had to like give a little to get, huh?
No. I can tell you plenty of stories about that, but I would not do that because Arturo is my family. And if he didn't talk publicly about it, but anyway, it was like me and Anders, Anders was like this beautiful skinhead kind of guy. And I was like a bald-headed punk rock guy. And we became friends with Arturo and started collaborating on art projects. He curated shows. He did a whole clothing line for us. Then we would start traveling and doing art shows in other cities like Germany. He actually did this great Fame is a Disease thing, like physical.
In any other subtext, you'd think that he was a juvenile delinquent, but because he's from New York, he's an artist.
You told me you had just attacked somebody with a machete.
And he told me that he's never going to stop creating, no matter what.
His entire life, from when he wakes up in the morning, from the very first moment he opens his eyes till the moment he closes his eyes, he's thinking about ways he can challenge himself and his cohorts into being creative.
I mean, I can't imagine making a film that wasn't anti-establishment. I mean, have you seen it? He's not part of the establishment.
I just knew that he wrote, and I knew that he was dyslexic, but I hadn't really considered what the two of those things meant until after I started editing his raw work.
Diagnosed at a very young age, and it's core to who you are.
30 years ago, Ethan started a zine that became an art movement.
It's known that the art world now is just a place that's about money and moving and shaking. It's not really about discovering artists or any of that anymore. So as artists, we have to carry on in our own sort of collective way, because I think we're some of the last that are left in the Alamo.
Oh God, it's so narcissistic. Who would make a film about themselves?